morning, Lee. Thanks so much for having me.
So, we have been talking about this a lot today. And for the most part of the people listening, at least the people who are responding to a couple of the guests I've had on, it's like at least an 80-20 split as far as people wanting to make sure that they have every opportunity to homeschool their kids. Some folks out there would like some oversight on some of this stuff. So give me give me the 30,000-foot view of, where Rob Sampson is on all of this, and then we can get into the weeds a little bit.
Well, you know me. I'm a pro-freedom guy. And, in my view, people that homeschool generally do it because they feel more comfortable, about educating their own children. They see the public school system as not an ideal situation. And obviously public schools, vary across our state in their quality. But, the city of Hartford is graduating kids without being able to read. So from that perspective, you can't blame people for wanting to take a much more active interest in their kids' education. And we need to support them if that's the case. Right. The United States Supreme Court has ruled over and over again that it's parents that are in control of their children's education, not the state, even though the state does have an obligation here in Connecticut. But I think that these folks, are targeted unfairly by Democrats. And we saw that over the last several days with their informational hearing yesterday. And it just doesn't make any sense to me because these are not the type of activities that I think are going on in the homeschool community that need to be policed by them.
Right. You would, and listen, that seems logical and reasonable that someone who is going to take the heavy burden of educating their kids in their own home, that's not an easy chore, right? It's a big task. You figure you're spending many hours a day trying to get your kids to learn to read and write and all of that. But so some of the detractors, Senator, say things to the contrary of what you had just said, which is maybe we need some oversight. Maybe there needs to be somebody who checks in with the kids. Or how do we know that the kids are actually performing at a rate that they should be for their age? In other words, should there be some kind of standardized test that comes with homeschooling? Can you talk to some of that?
Sure. Well, first off, we don't assume guilt in a free society, okay? And the fact of the matter is that if a child is being abused by a family member or anyone else, that can happen whether that kid goes to public school or is being homeschooled. They're not in the public school 24/7. They go home at some point. So I don't know that there's really a different situation there. There also seems to be this notion that, DCF and other entities that might be at play, that all of that stops in a case where a child is homeschooled. And that's not the case either. DCF is still an active presence, and they still have an obligation to investigate, and so does law enforcement. Bottom line is we don't assume public school parents are abusing their children. So why should we treat homeschool families differently? I don't think we should. It's about equal treatment under the law.
Right.
I also don't think there's any evidence of any kind of widespread abuse. The Democrats are pointing to this Waterbury issue, but that has nothing to do with this. In fact, that's a perfect example of the failure of government. It's a failure of DCF and of the public school system to adequately follow up, knowing that they had this situation where you had this kid who was starving basically when he was in school, picking through trash cans and so forth. So who knows who dropped the ball? We might not find out for a long time, if ever, because there's a criminal investigation going on there. And I would say homeschool is already regulated. And ultimately, at the end of the day, as I mentioned from the outset, parents are the first educators, not the state.
Well, okay. What about – I just lost my train of thought here for a second. There's also this idea that somehow –
Because my answer was so good.
So good. You threw me off. But what is there standardized tests, though, that go along with homeschooling or no?
Well, not that they're required
to
take.
So then the second part of that is then, what is it that specifically that the Democrats want to impose on the homeschooling parents? What are they talking about actually doing?
Well, they they're speaking in vague terms for the most part, although they do have this report from the Office of the Child Advocate, and forgive me, I do not have it in front of me, but it's a list of various types of check-ins and requirements like that.
Okay.
And again, it may not, at the end of the day, if it were to come to fruition, be as onerous as we are concerned about.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is that I think that homeschool families feel targeted.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're right to feel that way. I think that they deserve support, not suspicion, surveillance, or bureaucratic obstacles to homeschooling their children.
And I can tell you this, they're very angry with this being sort of imposed on them. It reminds me of the vaccine debate, doesn't it, a little bit?
Oh, it's almost exactly.
Right.
And many of the players are the same.
Right.
And that includes, the families that are impacted. A lot of these folks are homeschooling precisely because they would not comply with the state's requirements.
Right. No.
And I don't blame them. One thing has little to do with the other, but the imposition of the mandated vaccines, which a lot of parents have concerns for, and rightfully so, because I think that if the average person understood the extent at which we're providing vaccines and the potential for side effects and so forth, they might have pause as well. That's a decision that ultimately should lie with the parents. And I think it was less about the vaccines, frankly, and more symbolic about who's actually responsible for the child. Is the parent responsible for the child, or is the state responsible? And the Democrats, this is part of their global agenda. They want a dependent state, and they want to eliminate, the family, the whole idea of intelligent individuals and families making their own decisions. They want a dependent state that they control.
So it's interesting that we're talking about the political side of this with you today, because one of my earlier guests doesn't think this should be political, but unfortunately, now in 2025, everything is political, right?
Of course. I mean, it is political.
Yeah.
I mean, politics is the discussion of policy, and these policies do impact our society in different ways. And for me, this is wholly political for the Democrats.
Right.
They look at the homeschool community as a group that largely does not support them and their agenda. And I think they're just automatically hostile. I was making comparisons yesterday to how they treat gun owners. They look at gun owners as if they're all Republicans. Let's whack them around. Maybe some of them will leave the state. They'll move to Texas or South Carolina or something. We won't have to deal with them.
Right.
I think they actually look at homeschool families the same way. It's a disgrace in my view.
So we're talking with State Senator Rob Sampson. We appreciate him carving out some time. I know he's super busy. And, you had a press conference yesterday, correct? And you had a chance to meet a lot of these homeschoolers. And the kids themselves present themselves more often than not, almost above their age range. They're incredibly respectful for the most part. They're knowledgeable about a lot of different issues. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Absolutely. I have to tell you, Lee, yesterday was one of the most inspiring days I've ever had in my life, let alone in the legislature, et cetera. At one point, I was standing right at on the bottom floor of the LOB and looking up at the flag with literally thousands of families, parents and kids, and we were singing the national anthem in unison. And I had tears streaming down my face because it was that moving. It was really remarkable. And the feeling was not about homeschooling or anything other than these folks were there to defend themselves and their children and their children's futures against an oppressive government. They were there to make a statement about freedom and their rights. It was a beautiful thing for me, and it really recharged my batteries to know that there are so many like-minded folks in our state that are willing to actually show up and fight.
The more you talk and the more I hear about these particular parents and the kids, the further to the right of the needle my gauge goes on this topic, because I'm learning this as we go. For whatever reason, it's something that's flown under the radar for me. I don't have kids, so maybe that's why. So it's flown under the radar for me, not really seeing how passionate, how engaged these homeschooling parents are. So again, I'm with you about freedom. I've always been about that. Government always mucks things up, Senator. It seems like so maybe the more latitude and freedom you can give these parents to teach their kids. And as you had said, we are graduating kids from high school who can't read. We are, seeing test scores plummet. So there's got to be something to this.
Right. All the horror stories that you might hear about homeschooling families engaging in whatever kind of, terrible acts, all of that is happening in the public school arena as well. This issue for me should bring to light the desire to really investigate the state agencies involved, including the public school system itself, in the cities where it's actually failing.
Right.
And DCF. I mean, I think somebody dropped the ball in this Waterbury case for sure.
Right.
There are several other very prominent examples and countless small examples. And in my own interactions with DCF have not been positive on behalf of my constituents either. I don't know that agency performs its duties in a way that results in better outcomes for children. But I do know that parents love their kids. And, sure, maybe there's an exception to that somewhere, but that exception is not exclusive to homeschooling. That can happen whether the child is in public school or not. And I'd say more often than not, a parent that doesn't care as much about their children is much less likely to take on the role of being their teacher as well as their parent. So, I've never seen any indication that homeschooling has a negative impact. Quite the opposite.
Right.
Those kids at the Capitol were unbelievably well behaved. It was remarkable to me.
How about you mentioned DCF, and I was talking to State Rep Greg Howard about this the other day, and I mentioned the word maybe the DCF needs more teeth, more ability to actually do things, remove kids, what have you. But the problem is, and I'm going to defend DCF a little bit here because I know some folks who are involved, and yes, I do believe they drop the ball a lot of times, but there's just not a lot of bodies to help out in some of these cases. They're backloaded, their workload is incredible, and they don't have, in other words, if you find a kid who's being abused or something is a little askew, it's very difficult to remove that kid from that situation. And even if you do, where are you going to put him, Senator? You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I don't know that I necessarily see it that way, and I don't want to say that DCF has never accomplished anything good. I'm certain that they do. I also think that, they actually have an easier time removing a child from their parents than they should. I had a situation during the pandemic where, without getting into the personal aspect of my constituents, there was no abuse going on at all. There was some claims made by one parent against the other parent, which resulted in a child being taken by DCF temporarily. But because of the pandemic, the DCF effectively prevented these parents from being with their child for months and months. Even though the whole situation was resolved very quickly,
right.
It took, I think, close to a year before they were reunited. And these were young children who were put in a foster family. They're getting to, drift farther from their own parents,
right?
And to connect with this father. More damage was done in that
no,
case.
I've actually heard horror stories like that as well. But I get both sides of that story. It's a very difficult navigating that. Hey, one other thing? Did Trump wanted to give money for homeschooling, didn't he? That was part of one of his platforms, I think. Maybe.
Frankly, I don't know about that.
Yeah. Okay.
But speaking about Trump, I have to interject this one thing, which is that the Democrats are after Trump every day about being an authoritarian dictator who's telling us how to live our lives and dealing with every aspect of what we do. And yet, this is the Democrats, a perfect example of how they want to interfere with the rights of citizens.
Senator, I thank you. Is there more of this going on today, or is that just yesterday and now sort of we wait and see what happens? Where are we at?
Well, the conversation continues, although I don't think there's any organized meetings or anything going on, but certainly a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes.
All right, brother. Listen, thanks for coming on today. I appreciate it. Appreciate the time. Let's talk again soon.
It was totally my pleasure. Thanks for having me.